Hi guys, I'm Sarah and today we are going to be discussing rice pudding because rice pudding is super duper cheap. Now I've always had my own way of doing it, which is actually making it from leftover rice, because the only time I really make pudding is kind of if I've got something to use up, like bread pudding, that sort of thing. And so I've always just made it with rice that, say if I've made a curry and I've just made a bit too much rice and I've got some left over, I'll make some little pots of rice pudding and either have it as a warm pudding or put it cold in the kids' lunch boxes in little pots, and they absolutely love it. So I'm going to show you how to do that, but I thought, well, I should show you how to do it properly as well from scratch, because it actually is a pretty basic recipe. There are two amazing ladies who I know who make pretty mean rice pudding. The first one, the first recipe I'm actually going to do is my mummy-in-law, Teresa Smith. She does a baked rice pudding. Just for you, Tracy, my sister-in-law, I'm going to omit the raisins. So, but you can absolutely add raisins into this if you want to. And then the next one I'm going to do is my mum's recipe. It's on the stovetop in a pot. So I'm going to show you. Phone. Rude. Recording. First recipe. Now, she actually sent me some written instructions. And she said to use a deep oven dish. I don't know what size. I'm using one this size, and she did. I'm veering from the recipe already. She did say to butter it. The reason I'm not actually buttering the dish and using baking paper instead is because this is one of those where the bottom lifts out and it actually does leak a little bit. I don't fancy milk all over the bottom of my oven. So that's the reason. But otherwise you can just grease an oven dish. She said you can use either long or short grain rice. I'm going to use short grain. Now what gets me about this is the amount of rice used is so minimal. She actually gave me a recipe for 4 people and it only uses 2 tablespoons of rice. Gee. So I'm actually going to, because there's 5 of us and we're a hungry lot, we've all got taekwondo tonight and my kids come back ravenous from that, whether or not we've had dinner first. So I'm going to make enough for 6 people, apparently. So I'm going to use about 3 tablespoons of rice. I'm gonna slightly heap the tablespoon. Then we want 2 cups of milk. So I always make it from powder, just the Pam's Blue standard milk. Small amount of rice, but a pretty decent amount of liquid going in there. So we want 2 cups. And apparently you may need to add a little bit more as it's cooking, just judge the consistency. 1 teaspoon of vanilla essence. 2 tablespoons of sugar. Now, it says a teaspoon of butter. I'm not sure if that teaspoon was meant to be what I greased it with, or do I just put a teaspoon of butter? I'm just going to put a teaspoon of butter in. I mean, it's not going to ruin it, is it? So, okay, so there's my mixture. I'm just going to leave that blob of butter there. I'm sure it'll just, melt in. Now, apparently you want to bake this. It takes about 2 hours. At 180 degrees, and just stir it occasionally. Judge the consistency. If it's looking too dry, put a little bit more milk in. All right, now you get lots of these little, see like all the little brown bits of skin. I seem to recall those are things to fight over. I'm diving in. That is good. It is creamy. It is sweet. If you fancy, sprinkle a bit of nutmeg over the top of that. There is nothing wrong with that. It doesn't make for a huge portion each, but, put some fruit or something next to it if you want, or make a whole heap more. What do you reckon? Doesn't need raisins or anything, in my opinion.
Way more squishy.
It's perfectly good rice pudding.
Awesome.
Cool. We'll go on the next version. Christine Harris, my mummy, this is her version of rice pudding. Very, very similar, very much the same ingredients, just cooked in a different way. So it really comes down to personal preference, and she puts slightly different amounts and ratios. So she has said to feed about 6 people, half a cup of short grain rice, 2 tablespoons of sugar. Just going to give that a stir. Put it on a very low heat. Keep giving it a stir every now and then until you start to see little bubbles just starting to form around the edges. Next taste test. Now somehow my mum seems to come out thicker than what I've actually made it here, and I tried adding a little bit of corn flour to it and it thickened it up a little bit. I don't know, maybe you should just leave your mum's recipe to your mum to do. But anyway, but I mean flavour wise, you know, it's rice pudding, it is sweet, it is creamy. I'm actually thinking of chucking, we've got some blackberries in the freezer, I'm going to chuck a few frozen blackberries in mine.
Very creamy.
Very creamy. Is it yummy?
Very yummy.
Okay, now let's just talk quickly about my version of rice pudding, which is basically just a cheat version using leftover rice. Now what I do is I won't give you certain amounts because it depends how much you've got. So you can make it straight away that night after dinner, or you can put a lid on it, put it in the fridge, bring it out and do it the next day. If you do that, the rice will be a little bit more sort of congealed together. It might be a little bit more solid, but that's fine. A bit of soaking and it will be fine. Now, of course, the big difference there, it's not going to be quite as lovely and creamy, the rice itself, because it has been cooked in water and not milk. Very similar theory, just put what rice you've got in a pot on the stovetop. I put enough milk in to just cover the rice, so all the rice is soaking nicely, and start heating it very, very slowly. As it heats up, if you need to, if it's gone a bit solid, which it often does, just keep breaking it down and then stir in however much sugar your heart tells you. Maybe just start with a small amount. You can always put more in, but you can't take it out. And you can always put it in later on, because you do need to sort of very slowly cook it for a while. Again, I can't give you time frames because it depends how much you've got there. Put, you know, maybe a tablespoon of sugar in, put a teaspoon of vanilla essence in there, and just very, very slowly cook it up. Give it plenty of stirring, make sure that it's, you know, it gets to be a nice consistency. If you find you've put too much milk in at the end, you can also, you can mix in with a little bit of milk, just a bit of corn flour, stir it up, pour it in, and that should help it to thicken up nicely. There's also, you can also put a bit of cinnamon in with your rice pudding while it's cooking, or a bit of nutmeg, that's really nice. What I have actually done a couple of times before as well is put a bit of cocoa powder in it and called it chocolate rice pudding, and that actually works quite well to put in little pots in the kids' lunch boxes. I hope this video has been of some inspiration. Maybe try out a few different methods, see what works for you. Hit the like button, leave me a like, hit subscribe, and make some rice pudding. We'll see you next week. Bye.